Mr. Speaker, thank you so much for joining us today. It sounds like you think that this session went pretty well.
Well, against the unpredictable backdrop of the COVID-19, yes, I do think it went well. There were a lot of good things that came out of that. Idahoans should be happy that we set a prudent budget and that we funded the schools. We did all of the things that we normally do, and some of the that we usually take for granted. But against that backdrop, the state of Idaho's economy is doing great. We have a surplus that was unpredicted and frankly unprecedented. And so with that surplus, we were able to give ongoing ongoing income tax relief, including a refund check based on the taxes that you paid last year to all Idahoans. Even if you owed no taxes, there'll be a minimum that will be sent back. And that will end up being all totaled the largest tax cut that Idaho has ever done with regard to dollars. At the same time, we committed part of this good economic growth that we have in the state to infrastructure. We're the fastest growing state in the union, certainly in the top three, depending on who you ask. But we have the associated growing pains in our infrastructure. And so we were able to use part of that growth in the sales tax receipts to dedicate towards transportation infrastructure, not just for the state portion, but also going out to cities and counties and highway districts. And so that when we look back 10 years from now about what we did in 2021 that really counted, I think it's going to be this commitment to our infrastructure. We also redrew the lines a little bit on how the state is going to react to future emergencies or future disasters. That was code that had not been updated literally for over 50 years, and it was stress tested, and we found ways to improve that. Ultimately, the governor signed all of those bills, and we were able to draw a bright line in between what natural disasters, fires, floods, etc., and the other types of disasters, acts of war, terrorism, and the like. And so that was long overdue. We did that. I think maybe more importantly in some areas of the state is we increased the homeowners exemption by 25%. And that's real property tax relief to anyone that owns a home, and change some of the code around how property taxes are calculated, et cetera, so that we can better manage the growth and that we can have growth paying for growth rather than going back and, if you and I are neighbors, and if I improve my property, that should not result in an increase in your property taxes. And so we tried to bend the curve a little bit on the growth there. That's a work in progress. I mean, we still have the interim committee to take that up, and we will. And I suspect that we haven't heard the last about property taxes in Idaho.
And I want to touch on all of those topics, but since you ended with property tax, let's start there. We heard protests from a lot of officials, especially in the Treasure Valley, who were not only unhappy with the bill itself, but also the process. There were a number of iterations of this, but the one that finally passed and was signed by the governor came together, or at least came out publicly in the last 3 days of the legislature when you were there. There were people who felt that they didn't have enough time to give input on something that they felt would really affect their city or county budgets. So when it comes to such a large, complex bill with such big implications, why rush it through at the last minute?
Well, it may have looked rushed through to the outsiders, but that was an issue that we took up from the very beginning weeks of the session. There were conversations going back and forth with all of the stakeholders for the entire 120 days, frankly. So if you like the bill, you think it was a good process. If you don't like the bill, then you use the common refrain of, oh, this was forced through at the last minute. We hear that from time to time, but it doesn't pass with the margins that it did in the House and in the Senate and be signed by the governor if that was just dropped in everybody's lap in the last 3 days. It's a complicated bill. It's a complex subject. And so it took many, many hours of conversations to get the compromise that was represented in that House Bill 389. Now, it also caps the amount of budgets, that budgets can grow. And so in some places, some of the cities in the Treasure Valley will have to reevaluate the way they do it. But by and large, this was a pretty good bill. And again, all homeowners can expect a slight reduction in their property taxes based on this increase of the homeowner's exemption. And so, but again, I commit that this will be an ongoing process. We'll have conversations through the interim, and I'm positive next year on this very subject. One thing we all need to keep in mind is that the state, while we set the parameters and draw the laws within which everybody works, the budgets are set by the local units of government. So all of the problems that anybody has or complains about their taxes going up has been okay with a set of commissioners or a set of city council members. The local units of government do all property taxes go there and run their services. And so we've got to keep that in mind. Yes, the state has some oversight in all of that, but where the rubber meets the road is at the local level.
Are you concerned that Caldwell has paused new development while they study the implications of this bill and other cities are considering the same?
Well, I think that gives us, maybe some concern, but let's not underestimate the ability to create some political theater here and to exaggerate the effects of the bill. Caldwell and Western Ada County and Canyon County are growing very quickly, and at a level that is making your property taxes, if you're a homeowner, go up, and you have nothing to do with all of the growth and all of the new construction. So I think taxpayers are happy that they're not going to bear the burden of a lot of this new construction, nor should they. And we have a budget-driven system that sometimes cranks out these outcomes that no one likes, and that's where we are. Again, we also changed the circuit breaker process. That's basically where the state pays people that qualifies property taxes, and so made that a little easier, made that lowered some of the hurdles, made it easier to qualify for, but also removed the ability to game that system as well.
I wanted to ask you about transportation, speaking of growth. Past legislatures have long resisted using general fund dollars for transportation needs, saying that it would compete against things like education. This was brought up in debate by the co-chair of the Joint Budget Committee, Senator Steve Baer, said that he was concerned that during the next recession, transportation would be competing with things like corrections and K through 12 and all the other programs that rely on the general fund. Are you concerned about that?
No, I am not. We're using such a small portion of the general fund, sales tax specifically. Our economy is growing quickly. The receipts into the sales tax part of the budget are growing at a very sustainable rate, and to carve out part of that and dedicate that towards transportation, I think is fitting and proper. We've always relied on fuel taxes, and as the Idaho fleet becomes more efficient, the growth that we're all experiencing is not reflected in the receipts from the fuel tax, and we needed to index the transportation funding to a growing fund and something that more closely reflects what the economy is doing. fuel tax doesn't necessarily do that. And as many of us learned during the pandemic, we paid sales taxes on our Amazon deliveries, and part of that sales tax going back into support the infrastructure that delivered those packages is not out of the question and proper. Idaho is one of the few states that didn't rely on the general fund, and now we do to a small degree. And I don't think that will, again, when we look back 10 years from now, we're going to think that this was a pretty good idea and we're able to do some good stuff.
As the state's population keeps growing, our transportation needs, as you said, are going to grow with it. Is this going to be enough, or is there a next big step when it comes to transportation funding that you're looking at?
Well, we don't know, I guess, and that's why we're going to have a perfectly good legislative session next year and the year after that to address those questions. And we'll just have to see. Growth brings growing pains, and we've got to describe what those are today, 5 years out or whatever. We have maybe a pretty good idea, but we can't predict those completely, and so we got to be ready to react to what comes down the road. What we do know is that this investment that we made this session will pay dividends, and that not only in the state system, but also in the local system. All of the arterial roads that you use in the Treasure Valley to get from one place to the other, that's usually not the freeway. It's all of the other stuff, all the other roads that are managed by, in this case, ACHD, and they will be the direct recipient of this monies as well.
I wanted to ask you about the voter initiatives. I know that House Republicans feel strongly that rural Idaho should have a bigger say in what voter initiatives end up in the ballot. But the way that this bill was crafted, a single legislative district has veto power over something that potentially, 34 other districts want. Are you concerned about the potential that this might backfire, that there's a district, or there's a issue that every other district wants on the ballot, but Boise's North End says, we're going to veto this. We're going to dismiss what rural Idaho has to say.
Well, keep in mind that the threshold per district is only 6% of the people that voted in the last elections. That's not overly high. It was interesting. Yesterday, I was in a meeting in Twin Falls, in rural Twin Falls, out in Buell, and this issue came up, and those people in that meeting were completely complimentary in what the legislature did, in that getting the necessary signatures in each legislative district is not a foreign concept to them, and they don't want to be left out of the process. It's when the citizens act as the legislative branch, then that should involve all of them.
And the citizens acting as the legislative branch is a right that's protected in the Idaho Constitution. Are you confident that there are now 2 lawsuits over this initiative bill? Are you confident that this will hold up in court?
That's always questionable. Who knows? And whatever the court says is where we'll live in the future. And so I don't want to predict what they will do or not do, but I think that, number one, my position is to keep the initiative process and the referendum process viable, and but it also needs to represent the various constituencies clear across the state. When all of our growth or much of our growth is concentrated in a few areas, and I think that creates some concerns in the other areas that they don't want to be left out.
I wanted to ask you about the American Rescue Plan Act funds. That's a big reason, of course, that the legislature didn't adjourn for the session, but instead recessed with the ability to come back. Is there anything in the pipeline right now that you think will prompt you to come back this summer or fall?
Well, number one, we do not want to be a full-time legislature. And so as special sessions, regardless of the source, are going to have to be special. They're going to have to be special circumstances that will trigger us coming in. Having said that, Last year, our state received literally billions of dollars, and we've accounted for them and directed them in the areas where we could to make sure that regardless of the federal spending, that the state invested those dollars as wisely as we possibly could. And all of the ARPA monies are accounted for. Now, should there be additional billions of dollars coming down the road, then I think that might cross the threshold of where it's proper that we come in and oversee the appropriation process. Let's never forget who we work for, and that is you, the Idaho citizens, and you pay federal taxes and you pay state taxes. And if the federal pocket of your taxes is coming in the amounts that we've described, I don't think it's out of the question for the legislative branch, who is tasked constitutionally with the responsibility of appropriating the money, to leave a crack in the door for the unforeseen, and that's what we've done.
Does this indefinite recess set a precedent for future sessions?
It may not. I can't predict the future, but again, any disruption that it creates in the state agencies and with that bureaucracy is, I think, is a secondary concern to the way I described it earlier. We work for the people. We oversee the spending of their tax dollars. And if we get the amounts of dollars that we did last year, late this summer, then I think it's proper that the legislature have a role in the overseeing of that spending. Again, it's the legislative process. The governor's right in the middle of it as well, it's the check and balance system that we all are familiar with, and that's what we've done. It seems to, and we'll see how it works. But again, this is not a backdoor to a full-time legislature. None of us want that. Well, I can't speak for everyone, but the vast majority, and mostly speaking for myself, we do not want to have a full-time legislature. Idaho would not be well served by that at this point.
You know, I wanted to ask about the House's respectful workplace policy. I know that, first of all, you can't comment on whether there are any active complaints against members, though we know that there are thousands of signatures, and there have been more form letters submitted asking for an ethics hearing on Representative Priscilla Giddings. So I know that you can't comment on things that aren't yet public. I do want to ask you about a press release sent by your caucus chair about writing a new respectful workplace policy in response to what happened this past session with former Representative Von Ellinger. What sort of changes do you anticipate making to that policy?
Well, the respectful workplace policy is a policy that governs all of the employees in the Capitol and their expectations for their protection, et cetera, and how all of the various relationships will go. The members, both the House and Senate, are governed by their rules, but there's an interface between, obviously, the Capitol workplace policies and those rules. And so we're always looking for ways to improve that. And I did send out a release reiterating our support of the respectful workplace policy as presently constituted. It is a work product that came from the employees inside the building, from LSO, from the lobby corps, from the other staff members, and it was received by legislative council. But there is no formal way, frankly, for the Senate or the House to adopt that as our policy. It's the policy of the building, but we wanted to reiterate support for that. And so now, with heightened awareness of that policy, we want to have a lot of eyes from inside the building and outside the building take a look at that, so that it best reflects the HR policies of contemporary businesses. We want to, I had two daughters that worked here in the Capitol as pages and then interns nationally, in Congress. And I, as a father, and expected a respectful workplace policy there. I didn't, of all the things I had to worry about, it was not about my daughter's safety. And I think all parents, Idaho expects us to have a viable PAGE program, a viable intern program, and elected officials at all levels should be and must be held to a higher standard. And we want to make sure that our policies reflect that desire of holding everyone to a higher standard.
Some members of your caucus defended former Representative Von Ellinger by saying that there weren't any adopted, specific, spelled out rules that said that lawmakers should not date subordinates. Is that a valid criticism, and is the new policy going to spell that out explicitly?
That is absolutely not a valid criticism. Every new legislator goes through an extensive orientation process where they're made very familiar with these respectful workplace policy and what is expected of each of us as elected officials. And to say that we didn't know because there wasn't a rule, or there's no rule, so therefore there shouldn't be any consequence, that's a bogus argument.
You know, I want to ask, looking forward, you mentioned that this year's income tax bill was the largest tax relief bill that Idaho has ever seen. After passing cuts to income taxes, is there enough money in the budget looking forward to increase the grocery tax credit or repeal the grocery tax altogether, like members of your caucus, some members have said that they want?
Well, that's a complicated subject, and we could go into it if you have time. But here's the bottom line: is that if we remove the sales tax off of food, the retailers are used to you paying the sales tax, and they set their prices of milk, for example, based on what the market will bear. The fact that the state removes the sales tax off of that does not necessarily mean that the grocery retailers are going to reciprocate by lowering, by passing those savings on to you. You have proven through the years that you'll pay, let's say milk is $3 a gallon. You've been paying 18 cents on top of that as a sales tax. You've proven year after year that you'll pay $3.18 a gallon for milk. If the sales tax is removed, are they going to give that 18 cents back to you, or are they going to take part of that and put it in their pocket? That's one. And like I say, we can talk about all of the other good reasons for why everyone should file income taxes. We call it a grocery tax credit, but it's really a refundable income tax credit. And so you have to file your income taxes to qualify. That keeps everyone filing. There are many people that are in the state and that pass through that pay no state income tax, yet they pay sales tax on food, and they use Idaho services. And so, those are two quick things that come to mind. And we'll look at it down the road again. But if we're going to give tax relief, we should be relief that goes directly to Idahoans and not to out-of-staters or to people that don't file income tax.
All right, that's all the time we have. House Speaker Scott Bedke, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. We'll see you.